All right, I want to go to Senator Tom Cotton right now because this is among the many things he cited that we get to the bottom of what got COVID-19 and all these variants since started. A measure that he was looking at in the Senate to get to the bottom of all of this might have had a tough sell, but in the House, it's almost a duplicate version, is moving along pretty nicely. The question then becomes, if the Chinese are still unwilling to help out on the sources of all of this, can we sue them to force answers, or at least those who've lost loved ones, to sue outright to get money? Senator Tom Cotton with us. Senator, where does this stand?
Neil, thanks for having me on. You know, early last year, I was one of the first to ring the alarm bell about the coronavirus. And then I was also one of the first to suggest that we should make China pay, in this case, make them pay very concretely for the harm they've caused to Americans and our families and our businesses. There's a model for this kind of legislation. We've done it before with the 9/11 victims. We've done it for various terrorist victims as well. There's legislation in the House, too. It's got bipartisan support. This is just one of many ways that we can make China pay for unleashing this pandemic on the world.
It doesn't look like they're budging, Senator, and I'm wondering, of those who do try to sue China, getting money from them could prove even tougher, right?
Yeah, that's right. That's an experience we've had with, for instance, lawsuits have succeeded against the Ayatollahs in Iran for their terror campaigns against Americans or various other foreigners, but it certainly makes it much harder for the Chinese Communist Party to do business around the world, to place monies and assets outside of China's border. Look, I don't expect them to cooperate on these matters, just like I don't expect them to cooperate on the investigation to get to the bottom of the origins of the coronavirus, but I think most Americans can use their common sense on that as well.
You know, we have had luck in the past going after nations, sanctioning them, putting curbs on them. Libya comes to mind, and extracting cash that way. Do you think that should be the next, tack we take if China isn't addressing any of this?
Well, Neil, I think there's a lot of steps we could take that would make China pay for this pandemic, and there's steps that frankly should have been taken long ago. For instance, we can revoke their permanent most favored nation status, so the President and the Congress have to decide every year if we're going to continue giving special trade privileges to China. We could insist that international financial organizations like the World Bank treat China like the advanced industrial economy it is, not a third world economy as it once was, and stop giving them sweetheart financing deals. We can yank visas from Chinese Communist Party officials and their kids so they can't benefit from the United States' free and open system and our world-class higher education institutions. There's lots that we can do to make China pay for this and make it clear that we're taking these actions in part because of Chinese malevolence and deceitfulness in unleashing this pandemic on the world.
You know, what caught my interest today concerning you, Senator, was your pretty aggressive back and forth with Michael Gildy, the Chief of Naval Operations, over his recommended reading for new recruits in the Navy. Among them, how to be an anti-racist. You were not a fan of that, and this exchange kind of shows it. I'd like to harken back to earlier, this exchange.
When you're asked questions about this, you characterize it as a criticism of sailors for being weak. That is a straw man. It's not a criticism of sailors being weak. It's a criticism of your decision to include these books on your professional reading list. How did these books get on your reading list?
Sir, I chose a variety of books. There are over 50 books on my reading list to give our sailors a wide range of information from which I hope they can make facts-based decisions on both their ability to look outwardly at potential aggressors like China and Russia, as well as looking inwardly and being honest with ourselves in areas that we need to improve.
Senator, he obviously defended including such books in his recommended reading, but it did surprise people that was even out there. What did you think of what he said, that this is something, a way for those to just be open to all sorts of views?
Well, at best, it's a waste of time of our sailors to be reading such nonsense. They should be focused on basic seamanship or maritime strategy, naval history, leadership, and so forth. But more likely, it actually subverts morale and unit cohesion when the Chief of Naval Operations is recommending a book that says capitalism is essentially racist, racism is essentially capitalist, that the only remedy for past discrimination is present discrimination, that there are certain races that are inherently oppressive or collectively guilty of America's past sins, or that certain races are inherently victimized or oppressed. That's not the way to build a cohesive fighting force. I wish the Navy would focus on fighting real wars rather than fighting culture wars.
You know, in the meantime, Senator Iran has indicated right now, and its newly elected leader, that has no interest in joining in talks with Joe Biden or even broaching the subject. What do you think of that?
Yeah, Iran elected the hardest of hardliners last week, a man who committed mass murder in the 1980s of thousands of political prisoners. He's probably being set up to replace the aging and infirm supreme leader. He said he's not going to negotiate any follow-on agreement if we re-enter the nuclear deals, the so-called stronger and longer agreement that the Secretary of State and the President want. Yet we're still sitting in Vienna, still making concessions to Iran and the Ayatollahs, still begging for them to come back into the original nuclear deal. It's just a reminder that for the Democrats, it's always a good time to make a bad deal with Iran. In 2013, they elected a so-called moderate. Barack Obama and the Democrats said, we have to have a nuclear deal to empower them. Last week, they elected the hardest of hardliners, and Joe Biden and the Democrats say, we have to have a nuclear deal to constrain them. The Democrats will always make a bad deal with Iran if they want to. And remember, they're not getting taken to the cleaners. They're not negotiating poorly. This is exactly what they want. They want to get any deal that they can say has stopped Iran's nuclear program, even if it doesn't, so they can continue their efforts to build a tacit alliance with Iran that puts distance between the United States and our traditional allies, countries like Israel and the Arab nations in the Persian Gulf. That is very dangerous for America.
But apparently they're willing to do that without us. In other words, to reach out to European partners who originally signed on to the last deal that Donald Trump, tore up, and that they'll go with their own way without us. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that we should keep the sanctions in place that the Trump administration put in place. There's a reason why Iran was even willing to sit down in the first place. It wasn't just because they thought Joe Biden would give them a good deal. It's because their number one priority, both domestic and foreign, frankly, is to get the sanctions lifted. They need it for their economic growth and therefore political stability at home. But they also need it to restart their campaign of terror and imperial aggression throughout the Middle East, supporting groups like Hamas that were shooting rockets into Israel just last month, supporting the terrorist groups that are shooting at American troops and civilians across the region that have killed thousands of Americans over the years.
You know, this happens at a backdrop in this country where the Democrats are trying to resuscitate this voting rights measure, and they now seem to have won the support of Joe Manchin, which would mean technically if they blew up the filibuster, they might have the votes to get that through. Republicans have countered, you do that, then you can just forget about our support on infrastructure. Do you agree with that sentiment, that any hope of bipartisanship or cooperation on infrastructure is gone if Democrats force this issue on this voting rights measure where you only need a simple majority to get the vote?
Well, Neil, not quite, because I don't think Joe Manchin is committed to supporting this terrible bill to federalize our elections. He only has said he wants to start debate and offer amendments that he thinks would improve it. That's fine. I'm not going to vote to start that debate. No Republican will today, and the reason is simple. If you ask us what our alternative is to federalizing elections, we don't have an alternative. We don't want to federalize elections. We think our states and county governments do a pretty good job of it. We don't see any reason to move forward to debate a bill that would put all the power over our elections in the hands of politicians in Washington.
Well, apparently, though,
Chuck
Schumer says, Senator, but to be clear, sir, Senator Schumer says that Senator Manchin and I have come to an agreement. We worked it out. Senator Manchin then said he would vote yes to ensure every eligible voter is able to cast their ballot and participate in our great democracy. So it sounds like they have indeed found a way to be on the same page. If that is so, then they might push a simple majority vote on this. How would you feel about it?
So again, I'm not sure that Senator Manchin would vote to support this bill in the end, but he has said clearly, as Senator Sinema said today in an op-ed in the Washington Post, that they will not vote to destroy the rules and the customs of the Senate that are designed to forge bipartisanship and compromise. I don't think that'll happen. If they did nuke those rules, I can promise you it would be nuclear winter in the Senate for a long time to come.
Senator Cotton, thank you, sir. Very good seeing you again.
Thank you, Neil.